Well, there's been a lot of debate amongst fans about picking up Robert Pattinson as Bruce Wayne in the new Batman series. And many people like to point to the box office trying to say that that film was basically unsuccessful. Well, recently we got the final box office and revenue report for the Batman, and it turns out it was a lot more profitable and successful than many other DC films, including Batman's recent previous big box office win, Batman v Superman. Let's compare the numbers and break down why this movie was definitely more successful than its predecessor. Well, if you're a fan of movies, you know there's often a lot of debate on what is and isn't successful. And honestly, there are huge misconceptions amongst many fans about what the box office numbers really mean. Now, last year we got a reincarnation of the Batman from Matt Reeves, starring Robert Pattinson as the titular character. And honestly, if you're a fan of movies, you know this film actually did pretty darn good at the box office. Now, many people don't realize it, but Deadline actually does full revenue breakdowns for almost every movie that's released. And it does give you a really interesting behind-the-scenes peek into what goes on, where the money goes, and what it really takes to make money in the film industry. Now we've got a couple of graphics that break down their report, and I have to say they are pretty interesting. So let's start out with the Batman. Now, in this revenue report, you have to pay close attention because it starts off at the top with box office numbers: $369 for domestic, $376 for international, and $25 for China, totaling $770.9 million, which is a pretty darn good number. But you have to follow along because the box office numbers are not actually Warner Bros. Discovery's revenue. And when you look in the revenue column, that's where you see the actual money they made. Now, in the case of the Batman, they brought in about $355 of that $770 million as revenue, meaning the rest of it stayed with the theaters. Now, they also managed to pull in $130 million in home entertainment and another $150 in television rights and streaming sales. So overall, the film had $635 million worth of revenue. Now, this is where the magic really starts to happen, because when you get into the expenses, this is often where many movies lose their shirt. Now, the production cost for this movie was $200 million, with an additional $135 million in advertising, $35 million in video cost, $27 million in residuals, $36 million in overhead, and another $25 million in participations, which I'm not totally clear what that is, but it sounds like just Hollywood people getting paid. Meaning, the film actually cost $458 million in total, making the net profit for the studio $177 million. So at the end of the day, Warner Bros. Discovery made $177 million by spending about $450 million, meaning their cash-on-cash return, or revenue versus cost, was 1.39. Now, clearly making almost $200 million on the film is a big win, but when we look at this, we can compare it to other movies and really see how this turned out this way and why it's important. Now, when you compare it to the last movie that Batman was one of the main characters, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, you can get some similar numbers. Now, in the case of that movie, the global box office was $873 million. But once you factored in all the rentals and the domestic and foreign TV, the film's total revenue, the actual money it brought in, was $681 million. So remember, a great example of the box office is not the revenue. Now, this is where things get a little complicated, because in the case of this particular movie, it cost $250 million to make, with $157 million in print and ad revenue, meaning promoting the movie was more expensive and making this movie was significantly more expensive. As you go down the list, you also notice that some other costs are significantly higher, including participants being $55 million and video costs being $46. By the time the smoke cleared on Batman vs Superman, its total costs were $575 million and made $105 million of profit by spending $575. Now again, you looked at this cash-on-cash return, and ultimately the ratio of profit here was 1.18, significantly less than the 1.39 that the Batman brought in. Now at the end of the day, it is super clear. The Batman was and is more successful than its predecessor, not only making more net profit, at least according to Deadline, but also having a much better return on investment and profit ratio compared to the previous film. Now, this is a factor a lot of people don't understand, and this really drives that point home. Just because a movie does really well at the box office doesn't mean it's a success. Avengers Endgame made over $2 billion, but if that movie had fallen in at $900 or $1 billion in total revenue at the box office, well, quite honestly, the movie itself would have lost money even though it broke that $1 billion mark. The box office totals are often indicative of how fans feel about a project, but it doesn't make a project successful. And as you can see, these behind-the-scenes wranglings are really what drive a movie forward and help determine where the costs are and how much money is actually made. If a studio doesn't make profit, they don't make more movies. And hopefully this breakdown between the two projects kind of gives you an idea of why that's so important. Let me know if you like this breakdown. We'll try to do more of them in the future, and hopefully it helps you understand that The Batman really was a massive success.